The text arrived exactly as my porch lights flickered on. Do not come this year. You are no longer family. 3 minutes later, my security app pinged. I watched my mother standing in my living room, measuring my curtains like she owned the place, while my brother texted demanding I sign his contract addendum. They think they just canceled my Christmas, but they have no idea I hold the pen that can cancel their $1 million gift. My name is Riley Roberts, and at 35 years old, I had finally purchased the one thing that was supposed to be impenetrable, a mid-century modern sanctuary perched on the edge of the Juniper Ridge Hills. It was a structure of clean lines, redwood timber, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the Santa Rosa suburbs below. I had closed on the property 3 weeks ago, draining a savings account I had aggressively shielded from my family for 6 years. Driving up the winding road, the tires of my SUV crunching against the gravel, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest loosen slightly. The house was meant to be my exhale. It was dark, quiet, and exclusively mine. Or so I thought. As I rounded the final bend that revealed my driveway, my foot hovered over the brake pedal. The house should have been a silhouette against the night sky. Instead, the living room was ablaze with light. The warm yellow glow spilled out through the expansive glass walls, illuminating the frost on the front lawn. My stomach turned over, a physical reaction to a violation I had not yet confirmed but instinctively understood. I did not pull into the driveway. I killed the headlights and let the car glide silently into the shadow of a large oak tree 2 houses down. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling slightly not from cold, but from adrenaline. I opened the security camera application I had installed just days prior. The feed loaded, the small spinning wheel resolving into a crisp, high-definition live stream of my own living room. It felt like watching a movie of my own life, directed by someone who hated me. There they were, my mother, Diane, and my sister-in-law, Sloane. They were not intruding with the hesitation of trespassers. They were moving with the confident entitlement of owners. Diane was wearing her camel hair coat, the one she claimed cost $2,000, but I knew she bought at an outlet for $300. She held a metal tape measure in her hands. The yellow strip extended against the far wall where I had planned to install a bookshelf. I zoomed in on the screen. Diane was talking, her mouth moving rapidly, her free hand gesturing toward the open-concept kitchen. She pointed at my countertop's quartz, chosen specifically for its durability, and then swept her hand toward the dining area as if she were conducting an orchestra. Sloane stood nearby, nodding aggressively, holding her phone up as if she were taking reference photos for a renovation. They were planning, they were measuring, they were conceptually rearranging a space they had no deed to, no key to, and no right to. I sat in the dark car, the engine block ticking as it cooled, and watched them for nearly 30 minutes. I felt a bizarre detachment, a coldness that started at my fingertips and worked its way inward. A normal person would have stormed in. A normal person would have driven up the driveway, honked the horn, and demanded an explanation. But I was not a normal person. I was a Roberts. And in the Roberts family, direct confrontation was considered a lack of sophistication. We fought with implications, with silence, and with debt. The only way they could have gotten in was the emergency key I had given my father, Walter, 2 days ago. I had handed it to him with a specific, verbal instruction: this is for emergencies only. Fire or flood, do not give it to Mom. He had nodded, giving me that weary, beaten-down look he always wore, and I had been foolish enough to believe him. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. The notification banner slid down the top of the screen, obscuring Diane's face on the camera feed. It was a text message from Diane. Do not come to Christmas dinner this year. We have decided it is best for everyone. You bring a heavy energy that we do not need right now. Do not ruin the atmosphere. A single emoji followed the text, a bright, cheerful Christmas tree. It was a digital knife wrapped in festive paper. I stared at the words. The cruelty was precise. It was December 18th. They had waited until the week before the holiday, until the plans were solidified, to cut me out. They wanted me to feel the isolation. They wanted me to sit in my new, empty house and understand that without them, I was nothing. I was still processing the message when a second text came through. This one from my brother, Logan. Hey, now that you have the new place and plenty of space, I am going to stay there for a few months. My lease is up, and I need to save cash for the business expansion. Mom said it is fine. Also, I need you to sign that addendum for the contract by tomorrow. If you do not sign, consider yourself opting out of the family entirely. I looked from the text back to the camera feed. Inside my house, Diane was now moving toward the hallway, likely inspecting the bedrooms. Logan was not in the frame, but his entitlement was omnipresent. The audacity was breathtaking. In the span of 60 seconds, I had been disinvited from the family gathering and simultaneously informed that my home was being commandeered as temporary housing for the golden child, all while being extorted for a professional signature. They wanted my space. They wanted my professional stamp of approval. But they did not want me. I watched for another 5 minutes until the lights in the living room finally clicked off. The front door opened, and I saw them exit, Diane locking the door behind her with the key she wasn't supposed to have. They got into Diane's luxury SUV and drove away, heading in the opposite direction. Only then did I put my car in gear. I pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor floodlights blinding me for a second before snapping off. I walked to the front door, the key heavy in my hand. When I pushed the door open, the house smelled different. It didn't smell like fresh paint and cedar anymore. It smelled of Diane's floral perfume, something heavy and lingering, like a funeral arrangement. I did not take off my coat. I did not sit down. I walked to the kitchen island where I had left a stack of mail and saw that it had been rifled through. The edges of the envelopes were not aligned. They had checked my bank statements. I placed my phone on the counter and dialed the number for a 24-hour emergency locksmith. It was 8:15 in the evening. "This is Roberts," I said when the dispatcher answered. "I need a full rekey, immediately, and I want to upgrade to a biometric smart lock with a single-use code generator. Can you have someone here within the hour?" The price they quoted was exorbitant, $400 for the emergency call-out alone, but I agreed without a pause. "Do it," I said, "and I need the garage codes reset as well." While I waited for the locksmith, I did not cry. I had spent 35 years crying over my family, trying to twist myself into a shape that would fit their impossible expectations. I had loaned Logan money that vanished into thin air. I had covered for my father's mistakes. I had let Diane critique my weight, my career, and my singleness until I felt small enough to slip through the cracks in the floorboards. But tonight, the tears did not come. Instead, a distinct clarity washed over me. It was sharp and cold, like the winter air outside. I went to the utility closet and grabbed the glass cleaner and a roll of paper towels. I walked to the living room window, the massive pane of glass where Diane had been standing. I could see the faint smudge of her forehead where she had leaned against the glass to look out at the view, assessing the property value. I sprayed the cleaner. The chemical scent bit at my nose, overpowering the floral perfume. I wiped the glass. I scrubbed it in hard, circular motions. I was not just cleaning my house. I was erasing them. I was removing their fingerprints, their breath, their claim. My dog, a 70-pound rescue mix named Buster, trotted into the room. He had been at doggy daycare, and I had picked him up before coming home. But in the chaos, I had forgotten to greet him properly. He sensed the tension. He didn't jump up. He simply walked over to where I was kneeling by the window and pressed his heavy, warm body against my leg. He let out a long, ragged sigh and laid his head on my foot. I reached down and buried my hand in his fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. He was the only living thing in this world that loved me without condition, without a contract, without a performance bond. The locksmith arrived at 9 o'clock. He was a burly man who worked in silence, which I appreciated. I watched him dismantle the standard deadbolt, the one my father had a key to, and replace it with a sleek black keypad that required my fingerprint to open. When he finished, I programmed the master code. I did not write it down. I memorized it. "You are all set, ma'am," the locksmith said, handing me the invoice. "Nobody gets in unless you want them in." "Thank you," I said. "That is exactly the point." After he left, the house was finally silent again. The new lock hummed softly, a green light pulsing once before fading to black. I stood in the center of the living room. It was sparsely furnished, just a gray sofa, a rug, and in the corner, a small, pre-lit Christmas tree I had set up 2 days ago. It looked pathetic now, blinking quietly in the dark room. I looked at the tree, and then I looked at my phone, where Logan's text message still glowed on the screen. Sign the addendum. They thought they had stripped me of my holiday. They thought that by taking away the family gathering, they were punishing me, putting me in my place so I would be desperate enough to sign whatever they put in front of me just to be let back in the warmth. They thought I was the same Riley who used to beg for approval, but they had made a critical tactical error. They had shown me the reality of my position. I wasn't family. I was a resource, and when a resource is threatened, it protects itself. Logan needed that addendum. He needed the cash flow from the upcoming phase of the Ravenbrook Retreat project. He needed me to sign off on the liability shift so he could draw down the next tranche of $1 million from the developers. He thought my signature was a formality, a biological obligation. I walked over to the glass wall one last time. The reflection of the room stared back at me, a woman standing alone in a house she paid for, with a career she built, holding a power she had never dared to use. "They just canceled my invitation," I whispered to the empty room, my voice sounding flat and dead even to my own ears. I looked at the reflection of the Christmas tree, then at the reflection of my own eyes. They were dry. They were hard. "Fine," I said. "If I am not family, then I am just the project manager, and I am going to cancel the one thing they consider their future." In the architectural blueprints of the Roberts family, the roles had been drafted before either of us was old enough to read. My brother, Logan, was the elevation rendering. He was the glossy, full-color artistic impression that sat on an easel in the showroom to dazzle the investors. He was all curb-appeal, charming smile, firm handshake, and the kind of confident laugh that made people want to give him their money. I, on the other hand, was the retaining wall. I was the structural steel buried in the concrete. I was essential for the building to stand upright, but I was designed to be invisible, buried in the dirt, and solely responsible for bearing the load when the ground shifted. We did not talk about this hierarchy. We simply lived it. Logan owned a company called Caldwell TerraWorks. The name itself was a masterpiece of his branding genius. There was no Caldwell. He just thought it sounded established, like old money. He drove a lifted truck with the company logo decals on the door, wrapped in matte black, which he leased for $800 a month and wrote off as a business expense. He wore designer work boots that never seemed to touch actual mud. To the outside world, Logan was a successful entrepreneur, a man who built beautiful gardens and hardscapes for the wealthy elite of Sonoma County. To me, and to the bank accounts he frequently overdrew. Logan was a liability. He was a master of the start and a ghost at the finish. He could sell a client on a $50,000 backyard renovation with the passion of a poet, collecting the deposit with a flourish. But when the time came to actually pour the concrete or source the specific Japanese maples he had promised, Logan was suddenly unreachable. He would be at a networking event or on a mental health break in Cabo, leaving his foreman to apologize to angry homeowners. And when the lawsuits or the angry vendors came knocking, the family system would activate. My mother, Diane, would call me, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper that always made my stomach clench. She would tell me that Logan was just going through a rough patch, that the market was tough, that he just needed a bridge loan to get to the next job. I was the bank. I was always the bank. But I was not just a source of funds, I was an industry insider, which made my utility to them twofold. I worked for Northvale Development Group, a commercial real estate developer that reshaped skylines. My official title was Senior Landscape Architect, but my actual day-to-day role was far more cynical. I was the person who reviewed the bids, vetted the contractors, and ensured that the millions of dollars Northvale poured into a project did not disappear into the pockets of incompetent builders. I knew the code. I knew the costs of materials down to the cent. I knew how to spot a padded invoice from a mile away. Currently, Northvale was breaking ground on our flagship project for the coming year, the Ravenbrook Retreat. It was a massive, sprawling corporate campus designed to look like a wellness resort, nestled in the redwoods. The landscape architecture package alone, the planting, the irrigation, the retaining walls, and the outdoor meditative spaces was valued at $1.2 million. It was the kind of contract that could make a small company's decade. Or, in Logan's case, it was the kind of contract that could wipe out the massive, undisclosed debts he had likely accrued over the last 2 years. Logan had bid on the project. Normally, I would have recused myself immediately. Professional ethics demanded it, but when the blind bids came in 3 months ago, Caldwell TerraWorks had submitted a proposal that was statistically miraculous. His pricing was aggressive, coming in 10% under the nearest competitor. His proposed timeline was ambitious but mathematically possible, but it was his portfolio and his technical documentation that had paused my hand over the rejection stamp. The technical specs in his bid were flawless. They were detailed, specific, and referenced soil erosion metrics that most residential landscapers wouldn't even know how to calculate. They looked professional. In fact, they looked strangely familiar. As I had sat in my office reading his binder, I had felt a prickle of déjà vu, a sense that I had seen these exact phrasing and CAD drawings before. I could not place it at the time, and amidst the chaos of closing on my own house, I had let it slide. I had marked his bid as provisionally approved, pending the final contract addendum regarding liability insurance and performance bonds. That was the hook he was currently dangling. That was the signature he needed. He had won the preliminary bid, but he could not start billing and thus could not get the cash he desperately needed until the final legal documents were signed. Specifically, the addendum he had texted me about while his mother measured my living room. He wanted me to sign off on a clause that adjusted the inspection timeline, allowing him to invoice for materials before they were delivered to the site. It was a massive risk for Northvale. If I signed it, and he took the money and didn't deliver the stone and timber, I would be the one explaining to the board of directors why we were out $300,000 with nothing to show for it. My family did not see this as professional malpractice. They saw it as helping your brother for the last 6 years. While Logan played the role of the high-flying CEO, I had lived like a monk. This was the part of the story they did not know, the part that made their invasion of my new home so particularly violative. I earned a good salary, a very good salary, but nobody in my family knew that. To them, I was just getting by. I drove a 7-year-old sedan with a dent in the rear bumper. I wore clothes from Target or thrift stores when I visited them. I never took vacations. I declined invitations to expensive dinners, claiming I was saving for car repairs or student loans. I did this because I knew the rules of the Roberts economy. In our family, money was not private property. It was a communal resource that flowed upward to the parents or sideways to Logan. If Diane knew I had $50,000 in a high-yield savings account, she would have found a medical emergency or a leaky roof that cost exactly $50,000. If Logan knew I had excellent credit, he would have guilted me into co-signing a loan for a new excavator. So, I hoarded my resources in silence. I ate peanut butter toast for dinner. I spent my weekends hiking because it was free. I saved every bonus, every tax return, every unspent dime. I did this with a singular, burning goal to buy a home that was solely mine, a fortress where I could lock the door and breathe. The house in Juniper Ridge was the physical manifestation of 6 years of self-denial. It was my freedom, and within 48 hours of me getting the keys, they had sniffed it out. They looked at the mid-century modern architecture, the view, and the location, and they did not see my hard work. They saw an asset. They saw a free hotel. They saw a venue for their parties. I sat on my gray sofa, the silence of the house heavy around me. I thought about the text message from Diane again. You bring a heavy energy. It was almost funny. I brought heavy energy because I was the only one carrying the weight of reality. I remembered a specific incident from 2 years ago. Logan had taken a deposit for a swimming pool installation from a family friend, a nice elderly couple named the Davises. He had dug the hole in their backyard and then disappeared for 3 weeks because he had cash flow issues and couldn't buy the rebar. The Davises were threatening to go to the police. Diane had called me, weeping, saying that if Logan went to court, it would ruin the family reputation. He just needs $5,000 to buy the steel, she had sobbed. He will pay you back as soon as the next draw comes in. Please, Riley, do not be cold. Do not be selfish. Selfish, that was their favorite word for me. I had paid the $5,000. I wired it directly to the steel supplier to make sure it didn't end up funding Logan's bar tab. The pool got built, the Davises were happy, and I never saw that $5,000 again. When I asked Logan about it 3 months later, he laughed and said, "Come on, you know business is tight. Stop being such a bean counter. We are family." That was the system. Logan's failures were misfortunes. My solvency was an obligation. But tonight, the dynamic had shifted, even if they were too arrogant to see it. By disinviting me from Christmas, they had played their strongest emotional card. They assumed that the fear of exclusion, the shame of being the black sheep during the holidays, would break me. They assumed I would panic, drive over to their house, apologize for my heavy energy, and sign Logan's contract addendum just to be allowed back at the table. They were operating on an outdated schematic. They didn't realize that by cutting me off, they had severed the only thing keeping me in check, my desire to be loved by them. Without that desire, all that remained was the cold, hard logic of my profession. I picked up my laptop and opened the Northvale Secure Server. I navigated to the project folder for Ravenbrook Retreat. I found the subfolder for Caldwell TerraWorks. I looked at the pending contract. It was a PDF document, waiting for my digital signature. The blinking cursor on the screen seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat. Logan needed this. He had likely already spent the anticipated profits. He had probably borrowed money against this contract to pay off the debts from his last disaster. If this contract vanished, the dominoes would start to fall. His leased truck, his rented condo, his facade of success, it would all collapse. I was the only one who checked the foundations, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to shore them up. I was going to let gravity do its work. I did not sign the document. Instead, I opened a new email draft addressed to the Northvale Legal Department and the compliance officer. I did not type anything yet. I just typed the subject line, "Urgent Inquiry Regarding Vendor Qualification. Caldwell TerraWorks." I stared at the words. "You want to treat me like a bank," I said to the empty room. "Fine, but banks foreclose." I closed the laptop. The game had changed. They wanted to use Christmas as a weapon. I was about to show them that I could weaponize due diligence. And unlike their petty social exclusions, my weapon had the backing of corporate law and a $1 million bottom line. The phone rang exactly 3 minutes after I had locked the new biometric deadbolt. The sound echoed off the high ceilings and the unadorned glass walls of the living room, sharp and demanding. I knew who it was before I even looked at the screen. The caller ID flashed, "Mom," a word that used to summon a Pavlovian response of guilt and obligation, but tonight only triggered a spike of cortisol. I slid my thumb across the screen and put it on speaker. Placing the phone on the kitchen island, I needed my hands free. I felt like I was defusing a bomb. "Riley." Diane's voice filled the empty kitchen. It was not the voice of someone who had just been caught breaking and entering. It was bright, airy, and laced with a terrifying degree of casualness. "Why are you acting so strange? I saw on the camera that you changed the locks. That is a very aggressive reaction to family dropping by." I stared at the phone, marveling at the distortion of reality. "You were not dropping by. Mom, you were measuring my floors. You were planning a renovation in a house you do not own. We were just getting ideas," she scoffed, the sound sharp like tearing fabric. "Logan needs a place to land, and you have all those empty rooms. We were just seeing how to make it comfortable for him. You act like we committed a crime." "Who gave you the key?" I asked. My voice was low, steady. "Oh, stop it," she snapped, dropping the sweet act instantly. "Family does not need permission. Your father had it, so I used it. That is how marriage works. That is how family works. We share." Speaking of sharing, Logan is trying to reach you. He is on the other line. I am merging the calls. Be pleasant. Before I could object, the line clicked, and the screen shifted to a video call request. I hesitated, then accepted. Logan's face filled the screen. He was not at home. He appeared to be in a dimly lit, high-end steakhouse, the kind with leather booths and $18 cocktails. He was wearing a suit jacket that looked expensive but fit poorly around the shoulders. He looked flushed, frantic, and unmistakably arrogant. Logan said, his voice loud over the background noise of clinking silverware. "Finally, Mom said you were having a meltdown about the house. Look, forget the house for a second. We can talk about the move-in dates later. I need you to focus. I sent you the DocuSign link again. Did you get it?" "I got it," I said. "And I read it." "Great. Sign it. I need to submit the invoice to Northvale's accounts payable by tomorrow morning if I want the wire to clear before the holiday shutdown." I leaned over the counter, looking directly into the camera lens. "Logan, I cannot sign this. Do you even know what you are asking for in this addendum?" He waved a hand dismissively, taking a sip of something amber-colored. "It is just standard language. My lawyer said it is fine." "You do not have a lawyer. Logan, you have a paralegal friend you pay in beer," I said, cutting through his posture. "This is not standard. You are asking to change the payment milestone from installation complete and inspected to materials ordered and stored off-site. You want Northvale to release 40% of the contract value, nearly $500,000, before a single shovel hits the dirt, and you want to waive the requirement for a bonded warehouse inspection. So," Logan's eyes narrowed, "I need the liquidity to buy the trees. The nurseries require deposits. You know how this works. Stop acting like a compliance officer and act like my sister." "I am the compliance officer on this project, Logan," I shouted, my voice cracking for the first time. "If I sign this, and you take that $500,000 and spend it on whatever you spend it on, and the trees do not show up, or they are the wrong species, or they die because they were not stored properly, Northvale comes after me. I am the one certifying the risk. You are asking me to put my license on the line so you can get cash up front." "You do not trust me?" Logan asked. It was the ultimate weapon in the Roberts arsenal, the accusation of betrayal. "It is not about trust. It is about the contract," I said. "If you want the money for materials, submit the receipts from the nursery and the address of the bonded warehouse. I will send an inspector tomorrow. If the stock is there, I will authorize the payment. That is the procedure." There was a silence on the line. I saw Logan's jaw tighten. He looked away from the camera, then back, his expression hardening into something ugly. "I cannot do that," he muttered. "Why not?" "Because I have not ordered the trees yet," he snapped. "I need the money to place the order. My credit line is maxed out. If I do not get this cash release, I lose the hold on the inventory. If I lose the inventory, I blow the schedule. If I blow the schedule, I breach the main contract. Do you want to be the reason I fail? Do you want to be the reason the family business goes under?" "The family business," I laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "It is your business, Logan, and you bid on a project you did not have the capital to execute. You lied on your financial disclosure forms, didn't you? You checked the box that said you had sufficient operating capital." "Diane, talk to her," Logan said, looking off screen as if my mother was sitting right there in the restaurant with him, but her voice came from the merged audio line. "Riley," Diane's voice was ice cold now, "you are nitpicking. Your brother has $1 million opportunity. $1 million that can set him up for life. That can set us all up. And you are holding it hostage over paperwork. It is fraud, Mom. It is technical fraud." "It is a loan," she screamed. "It is just an advance. He will do the work. He always does the work. Why do you have to be so difficult? Why do you always have to be the one who ruins everything?" I am trying to keep him from getting sued. I am trying to keep me from getting fired. If you do not sign that paper tonight, Diane said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, then do not bother showing up for Christmas dinner. Seriously, do not come. I will not have you sitting at my table, eating my food, looking at your brother while you sabotage his future. If you cannot support this family, you are not part of it. Think about your grandparents. Do you want to explain to Nana why you are not there? Do you want to break her heart? The threat hung in the air. The grandparents. The ultimate guilt trip. Nana was 85. They knew I would walk through fire to avoid upsetting her. They were using an old woman's potential disappointment to extort a corporate signature. I looked around my kitchen. I looked at the smart lock on the door. I looked at the darkness pressing against the glass. Okay, I said softly. Okay. You will sign, Logan asked, hope surging in his voice. No, I said. Okay, I won't come. What? Diane sounded stunned. She had played the ace, and I hadn't folded. You said if I don't sign, I shouldn't come, so I am not coming. Tell Nana whatever lie you want. Tell her I have the flu. Tell her I'm working. I don't care. Riley, you are making a mistake, Logan said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. You are choosing a corporation over your blood. I am choosing not to go to prison for you. Logan, I am choosing not to lose my license for you. I don't need your permission to live, and I certainly don't need your permission to keep my job. I hung up. My hand was shaking as I pressed the red button. The house fell silent again, but the silence was different now. It was not peaceful. It was vibrating with the energy of a bridge burning in real time. I stood there for a long moment, breathing hard. I expected to feel devastated. I expected to feel the crushing weight of loneliness. But instead, I felt a strange, light-headed clarity. They had fired their biggest gun, and I was still standing. Then, my phone buzzed again. A text message. It wasn't Diane or Logan. It was Sloan, my sister-in-law. Sloan, who worked in pharmaceutical sales and had the moral compass of a shark. If you do not sign that addendum by morning, we are going to file a formal complaint with Northvale HR. We will tell them you fed Logan confidential competitor pricing to help him win the bid. We will tell them you rigged the tender process because he is your brother. Conflict of interest, nepotism. You will be under investigation before the turkey is carved. I read the text twice. My blood ran cold. They weren't just trying to bully me. They were blackmailing me. They were threatening to accuse me of the very corruption I was trying to prevent. And the terrifying part was, it was a plausible lie. Logan was my brother. He had won the bid. If they claimed I helped him, it would be my word against theirs. And in the corporate world, the mere accusation of rigging a $1.2 million contract was enough to get you suspended, if not fired. They didn't just want the house. They didn't just want the money. They wanted me to be their legal shield, and if I refused, they were willing to turn me into the scapegoat. I walked over to the kitchen island and opened my laptop again. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was war, and in war, you need intelligence. If they were this confident, this desperate, there had to be more to it than just a cash flow problem. Logan was lazy, but he wasn't usually suicidal. To threaten my career meant he was covering up something massive. I pulled up the Caldwell TerraWorks bid package again. I had reviewed it weeks ago, but I had reviewed it with the eyes of a sister trying to be supportive, scanning for reasons to say yes. Now. I reviewed it with the eyes of a forensic auditor. I scrolled past the pricing sheets, past the insurance certificates that I now suspected were altered, and went straight to the design schematics. The landscape plan for the central courtyard of Ravenbrook Retreat was a complex drawing. It involved a specific layering of drought-tolerant grasses and a complex water retention system. When I had first seen it, I had been impressed. I had thought Logan finally hired a decent freelancer. I zoomed in on the planting schedule. The Latin names of the plants were listed in a specific order: Festuca glauca, Penicetum alopecuroides. I frowned. That combination, that specific grouping, I right-clicked on the PDF file and selected Properties. I navigated to the Metadata tab. Most people scrub the metadata before submitting a bid. Logan, apparently, was not most people, or he was just sloppy. The author field did not say Caldwell TerraWorks. It did not say Logan Roberts. It said Aaron Design Capstone 2012. The room spun. Aaron. That was my middle name. I hadn't used it professionally since grad school. I opened my own external hard drive, the one I kept in the fireproof safe. I plugged it in and searched for a folder from 2012. There it was. My master's thesis project, a design for a theoretical, sustainable corporate campus in Oregon. I opened the file. I put the two windows side by side on my screen. They were identical. He hadn't just hired a designer. He hadn't just copied a style. Logan had accessed my old personal computer, probably the one I left at my parents' house years ago when I moved out, and he had stolen my graduate thesis. He had stripped my name off the title block, slapped his logo on it, and sold my own work back to my own company for $1 million. And the metadata showed the file was last modified 3 months ago. I checked my calendar. 3 months ago. The weekend of my father's birthday. I had gone home for dinner. I had left my laptop bag in the study while I helped Diane cook. Diane had been so sweet that night. She had asked so many questions about my work, about what Northvale was looking for in a design. She had kept me in the kitchen for hours. I realized now that I hadn't been a guest at that dinner. I had been a distraction. While Diane kept me busy chopping vegetables, someone, Logan, or maybe even my father, had been copying my hard drive. Sloane's threat echoed in my mind. We will tell them you fed Logan confidential info. They were projecting. They were accusing me of the exact crime they had committed. I sat back in the chair. The light from the laptop screen was the only thing illuminating the dark kitchen. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the expensive glass panes I had wiped clean of their fingerprints. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the urge to call them and scream. That would be giving them what they wanted, emotion. They canceled Christmas, I whispered to the empty room. My voice sounded strange, devoid of the tremor that had been there an hour ago. I looked at the stolen file on the screen. It was proof of theft. It was proof of corporate espionage. It was proof that my family looked at me and saw nothing but a carcass to be scavenged. Noel is canceled, I said, reaching for my phone to take a photo of the screen. But the audit is just beginning, and when I am done, you won't just be out of a contract, you will be out of options. I saved the screenshot. I backed up the files. I created a new folder on my desktop and named it simply Evidence. The sadness was gone. In its place was a cold, razor-sharp determination. If they wanted to play legal games, they had chosen the wrong opponent. They thought they were dealing with a heartbroken daughter. They had no idea they had just declared war on a senior project manager with a paper trail. The transition from being a daughter to being a plaintiff happened at exactly 8 a.m. the following morning. It was not a decision born of anger, but of survival. I had spent the night not sleeping, but compiling. My kitchen table, usually reserved for coffee and quiet breakfasts, had transformed into a war room. Stacks of printed emails, bank transfer records from years ago, and the damning side-by-side comparison of my graduate thesis and Logan's bid documents covered the court surface. I did not go into the office. I called in a personal day, but I was working harder than I ever had on any construction site. My first call was not to my family, but to a lawyer named Sarah, a specialist in civil litigation whom I had met at a networking event 3 years ago. She was expensive, $450 an hour, but I needed someone who viewed familial guilt as irrelevant noise. I need a cease and desist order drafted immediately, I told her, skipping the pleasantries. And I need a trespass warning. The subjects are my mother, Diane Roberts, my brother, Logan Roberts, and my sister-in-law, Sloane Roberts. Sarah paused on the other end of the line. Riley, these are heavy measures. Usually, we start with a letter, a formal request. They broke into my home last night using a key I entrusted to my father for emergencies, I said, my voice flat and monotone. They measured my walls for a renovation I did not authorize. They are currently attempting to extort a signature on a commercial contract by threatening to report me for ethical violations I did not commit. We are past the letter stage. I want the legal equivalent of a razor wire fence. Understood, Sarah said, her tone shifting instantly to match mine. I will have the draft ready by noon. We will serve them via email and certified mail. Do you want to include a clause about police involvement? Yes, I said. Explicitly state that any further unauthorized presence on my property will result in an immediate call to law enforcement for criminal trespass. Hanging up, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't guilt. It was the relief of finally outsourcing the enforcement of my boundaries. For 35 years. I had tried to hold the line with please and no. It hadn't worked. Now, the state of California would hold the line for me. My second task was the most dangerous one. I opened my work laptop and logged into the Northvale Secure Video Conferencing System. I sent an urgent meeting request to the Director of Compliance and the Head of Human Resources. I marked the priority as critical. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. When the faces of the two executives appeared on my screen, they looked concerned. I had never requested a meeting like this. I was the invisible problem solver, not the problem creator. Riley, the compliance director said, everything all right? I am officially declaring a conflict of interest regarding the Ravenbrook Retreat project. I said, I didn't stammer. I didn't look down. The primary landscape contractor, Caldwell TerraWorks, is owned by my brother, Logan Roberts. I am formally recusing myself from the final approval of his contract and from any oversight of his payment schedules. The HR director frowned, tapping a pen against her desk. Riley, we knew Logan was your brother. You mentioned it casually during the initial bid phase, and we noted it, but you said it wouldn't be an issue because the bid was blind. Why are you formalizing this recusal now? Right at the signing phase? It looks reactive. This was the moment. If I lied, I was dead. If I told too much truth, I looked unstable. I had to walk the line of corporate self-preservation. Because as of last night, the vendor attempted to leverage our personal relationship to bypass standard inspection protocols. I said, I was asked to sign an addendum waiving the materials inspection in exchange for an early release of funds. When I refused, personal threats were made regarding my standing in the family. I cannot in good conscience act as the impartial steward of Northvale's capital when the vendor is attempting to manipulate the approval process through familial channels. The compliance director's eyes widened. This was no longer a family issue. It was an attempted vendor fraud. They asked you to waive the inspection, he asked, his voice sharpening. Yes, specifically, the bonded warehouse requirement for the plant stock. I took a breath. Because of this, I am requesting that Northvale initiate an immediate, independent audit of the Caldwell TerraWorks file. I recommend we verify their insurance carriers directly, not just accept the PDFs on file. I also recommend a deep dive into their safety certification and personnel roster. You think the file is dirty? The HR director asked quietly. I think if a vendor is desperate enough to threaten a project manager at her private residence, they are desperate about other things too. I replied, I am protecting the company, and I am protecting my license. There was a long silence. Then the compliance director nodded. You did the right thing bringing this to us. Riley, we will assign a third-party auditor by end of day. You are recused. Direct all further communication from TerraWorks to legal. Do not answer their calls. Understood, I said. I closed the laptop. My hands were sweating, but the deed was done. By recusing myself, I had stripped Logan of his leverage. He could no longer threaten to ruin my career by claiming I was biased, because I had just removed myself from the equation, and by triggering the audit, I had set a machine in motion that I could not stop, even if I wanted to. But I wasn't done. The procedural thriller I was living in required evidence, not just defensive maneuvers. I went back to the metadata issue, the stolen thesis. I needed to know how. Logan was not a hacker. He struggled to convert a Word document to a PDF. He didn't break into my cloud storage. He had physical access. I logged into my old personal email account. the one I used back in grad school. I searched for mom and laptop. I found it. An email from 3 years ago, dated September 14th. Subject: recipe for apple pie. Hi, honey. My iPad is acting up and I cannot see the screen. I am at your place waiting for you to get home from work. I borrowed your old laptop from the study to look up that pie recipe for Dad's birthday. Hope you do not mind. Love, Mom. I looked at the date. September 14th. I switched tabs to the file properties of the stolen design document Logan had submitted. The created date on the copied file was September 14th, 3 years ago, timestamp 4:30 p.m. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. Diane hadn't been baking a pie. She had been copying my hard drive. She had likely been instructed by Logan to get anything that looks like a drawing. They had been planning to strip mine my intellectual property for years, waiting for a project big enough to use it. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was an archive. I was a resource library. They felt entitled to check out materials from without a library card. I grabbed my keys and drove to the nearest electronics superstore. I bought 3 high-definition, wide-angle security cameras with audio recording capabilities and a local hard drive backup. I wasn't going to rely on the cloud alone. I spent the afternoon on a ladder, drilling into the pristine redwood siding of my new house. I mounted one camera facing the driveway, one covering the front porch, and one hidden in the planter box near the living room window where they had peered in. As I configured the software, I set the sensitivity to maximum. I enabled the continuous recording feature. This wasn't about security anymore. It was about documentation. In California, you generally need 2-party consent to record audio, but there is an exception for recording evidence of a crime or when the person has no expectation of privacy while committing a trespass. If they came to my door to scream at me, I wanted every syllable captured in 4K resolution at 4 p.m. Sarah emailed me the finalized documents. The cease and desist letter was a thing of beauty. It was cold, clinical, and devoid of any emotion. It simply stated facts and consequences. To Diane Roberts, Logan Roberts, and Sloan Roberts. You are hereby notified that your license to enter the property located at Juniper Ridge is revoked. Any future entry will be considered criminal trespass under California Penal Code Section 602. Furthermore, any contact with Riley Roberts regarding the Northvale TerraWorks contract will be considered harassment and tortious interference with business relations. I signed it digitally. I sent it via email to all 3 of them. Then I drove to the post office and sent physical copies via certified mail. Return receipt requested. I sat in my car in the post office parking lot, watching people rush in and out with armfuls of Christmas packages. They were mailing gifts. I was mailing a restraining order in everything but name. My phone buzzed. It was Logan. He hadn't read the email yet. Just a reminder. The text read, "The wire needs to clear by Friday. If you do not sign today, do not bother calling us ever again. We mean it. Riley, you are cutting yourself off." I looked at the message. You are cutting yourself off. He was trying to frame my survival as an act of amputation. He wanted me to believe that I was the one holding the knife, when in reality, I was just refusing to bleed out for them. I typed a reply, then deleted it. The lawyer had been clear, no engagement. Instead, I opened my calendar. It was December 19th. There were exactly 6 days until Christmas. They had chosen the holiday season as their stage because they knew the cultural pressure to make peace would be at its peak. They counted on the Christmas lights, the nostalgia, and the fear of being alone to force my hand. They thought the backdrop of the holiday would make me weak, but they had miscalculated. The holiday didn't make me weak. It made the betrayal starker. It highlighted the transactional nature of their love. I drove back up the hill to my glass house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valley. As I pulled into the driveway, the new cameras clicked on, their tiny red lights blinking in the twilight. I went inside and locked the door with my fingerprint. I fed the dog. I poured a glass of water. I wasn't waiting for Santa Claus. I was waiting for the inevitable explosion when they opened their email. I was waiting for the Northvale audit team to tear Logan's fraudulent company apart piece by piece. Let them have their Christmas, I said to the silence. I will take the truth. I sat down at the kitchen island and opened a new file on my laptop. I named it Timeline of Events for Civil Suit. If they wanted to play games with my livelihood, I would ensure that by the time the new year rang in, they wouldn't just be uninvited from my house. They would be uninsurable in the state of California. The daughter was gone. The plaintiff was ready. The silence in my kitchen was broken not by a threat, but by the buzzing of my phone displaying a name that rarely appeared on my screen, Harper. My youngest sister, Harper, was 22, finishing her degree in Oregon, and notoriously allergic to family conflict. She was the peacekeeper, the one who floated above the toxic sludge of the Roberts family dynamic on a cloud of studied neutrality. If Logan was the golden child, and I was the scapegoat, Harper was the mascot. She usually only called to ask for career advice or to send me memes. I answered on the second ring. "Hey, Harps," I said, trying to keep the tension out of my voice. "Everything okay?" "Riley," she whispered. Her voice was trembling. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. "I am sorry. I did not want to be the one to tell you, but I cannot sleep. I feel like I'm going to throw up." My stomach dropped. "Tell me, what, is everyone okay?" "Physically, yes," she said, her breath hitching. "But I was on FaceTime with Dad an hour ago. He had been drinking, a lot. You know how he gets when he drinks whiskey." I knew exactly how he got. Walter Roberts became loose-lipped and boastful when the bourbon hit his bloodstream. "What did he say?" "Harper. He was bragging about how they fixed the Logan situation," she said, her voice barely audible. "He said they found the money for the Ravenbrook bond. He said they had to liquidate an asset, but it was worth it to save the company." "What asset?" I asked, though a cold dread was already pooling in my gut. They didn't have assets. They had leased cars and mortgaged walls. "The cabin," Harper choked out. "Riley, they sold Pine Hollow." I froze. My hand gripped the edge of the quartz countertop so hard my knuckles turned white. Pine Hollow. It was a small, A-frame cabin in the mountains, 2 hours north of here. It wasn't a mansion. It was a drafty, cedar-shingled refuge that smelled of wood smoke and old paper, but it was mine, or it was supposed to be. When my grandmother died 5 years ago, she had left the bulk of her estate to my parents, but she had explicitly left the cabin to me in a trust. She had told me, holding my hand in her hospital room, that she knew I was the one who needed a place to hide. "The boys get the glory," she had rasped. "You get the peace." "That is impossible," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "The deed is in a trust. I am the sole beneficiary. They cannot sell it without my signature." "Dad said they handled the paperwork." Harper was crying now. "He said you were too busy with your career to use it anyway. He said they sold it to a developer from the Bay Area 3 weeks ago. Cash deal. Quick close." 3 weeks ago, the timeline slammed into place like a prison door. 3 weeks ago, Logan had suddenly come up with the $50,000 needed for the performance bond the insurance policy required to bid on the Ravenbrook project. I had wondered where he got the money. I had assumed he took out a predatory loan or maxed out another credit card. I had never imagined they would cannibalize my inheritance to feed his ambition. "Why?" I asked, the words scraping my throat. "Why did they need that much cash so fast?" "Logan messed up, Riley." Harper sniffled. "It was not just cash flow. He got into some crypto scheme, something about leverage trading. He lost everything. He was in debt to some bad people for over $80,000. Mom and Dad panicked. They sold the cabin to pay off his bookies and used the rest to buy the bond for your project. They are banking on the Northvale contract to earn the money back before you found out." I slowly lowered myself onto a bar stool because my legs refused to hold me. The betrayal was so total, so comprehensive, that it was almost awe-inspiring. They hadn't just invaded my home, they had liquidated my sanctuary. They had stolen the one thing my grandmother had given me to ensure I would always have a safety net, and they had turned it into a gambling chip for Logan's career. Did they say anything else? I asked. Dad said he said it was for the greater good. Harper whispered, He said you are strong. You can buy your own cabin someday. But Logan needed a win. I closed my eyes. The greater good, the Roberts family motto, which always meant, whatever is good for Logan. Thank you for telling me. Harper, I said, you did the right thing. Please do not tell them I told you, she begged. They will cut me off too. I will not, I promised. Go to sleep. I will handle this. I hung up. The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. The time for emotion had passed. I was now operating in a state of cold, clinical fury. I looked at the clock. It was 9:30 at night. I dialed Sarah, my lawyer. She picked up on the first ring. I hope you are calling to tell me they signed the cease and desist, Sarah said. They sold Pine Hollow, I said. There was a long pause on the line. Excuse me. The property listed in your grandmother's trust. The one where we have a copy of the will stating you are the beneficiary. Yes. My father told my sister they handled the paperwork and sold it for cash 3 weeks ago to cover my brother's gambling debts and post the bond for the Northvale contract. Riley, Sarah's voice shifted. It was no longer the voice of a civil litigator. It was the voice of a shark smelling blood. If the title was held in the trust, and you are the trustee or the beneficiary with controlling interest, they could not have sold it without your signature. If the sale went through, that means someone signed your name. They forged it, I said. They must have, or they forged a power of attorney. That is not a family dispute, Sarah said sharply. That is a felony. That is grand theft, forgery, and wire fraud if they used electronic banking to move the proceeds. We are talking about prison time. Riley, not civil court, prison. I want to know where the money went, I said. I want a forensic accounting trail. We can file for an emergency injunction to freeze the proceeds, Sarah said. But if they sold it 3 weeks ago, the money is likely already moved. You said they used it for a bond. The performance bond for the Ravenbrook Retreat project, I said. The project I manage, the irony was so bitter it tasted like metal. My inheritance had been stolen to purchase the insurance policy that allowed my brother to defraud my employer. I was literally, physically, funding my own professional demise. Okay, Sarah said. Here is what we do. I am going to pull the title transfer records from the county clerk's office first thing in the morning. I will see whose signature is on that deed. If it is yours, we file an affidavit of forgery immediately. And Riley, you need to tell Northvale. I already recused myself, I said. No, you need to tell them that the bond, the financial guarantee of the contractor, was purchased with stolen funds. That compromises the integrity of the contract itself. It is fruit of the poisonous tree. We hung up with a plan of action. I sat there in the dark, thinking about the cabin. I thought about the smell of the cedar. I thought about the weekends I spent there alone, reading, recovering from the exhaustion of trying to please these people. They had taken that from me. They hadn't just taken a building, they had taken my grandmother's love. They had cashed it out like a winning lottery ticket. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Logan. He clearly didn't know that Harper had called me. He was still operating on the assumption that I was just being difficult about the addendum. Come on, stop being dramatic. Do not make a big deal out of this. Suing your family at Christmas. What kind of person does that? Just sign the paper and let's move on. We can talk about the house stuff later. I stared at the screen. What kind of person does that? I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a terrifying sound in the quiet house. They thought I was suing them because they broke into my house. They thought this was about boundaries. They had no idea I knew about the theft. You want to know what kind of person does that? I whispered to the phone. The kind of person who just realized her family is a criminal enterprise. I didn't reply to Logan. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the Northvale vendor portal. I had recused myself from approving the contract, but I still had administrative access to view the documents. I found the performance bond uploaded by Caldwell TerraWorks. It was issued by a surety company in Sacramento. The value was $50,000. The date of issue was November 28th. I opened a new browser tab and went to the county recorder's website for the county where Pine Hollow was located. It was public record. I searched for the address. Status sold. Date November 25th. Sale price $210,000. The math was sickeningly perfect. They sold my safe haven for $210,000, probably half its market value for a quick sale. 3 days later, they bought the $50,000 bond. The rest of the money, $160,000, had likely vanished into Logan's debts or my parents' pockets. They had sold my future to pay for Logan's mistakes. I sat back, the rage settling into a hard, dense mass in my chest. They wanted the $1 million contract. They needed it. That contract was the only way they could potentially earn enough to pay off whatever other debts they had, or perhaps even in their delusional minds, buy the cabin back one day and pretend nothing happened. The Ravenbrook contract was their lifeline, and it was built on a foundation of my stolen property. I wasn't just going to stop them from visiting my house. I wasn't just going to stop them from ruining my Christmas. I was going to sever the artery. I opened the email draft I had started for the Northvale internal audit team. I attached the screenshot of the property sale. I attached the screenshot of the performance bond date. And I typed a new heading, Evidence of Illicit Funding for Vendor Qualification. I didn't hit send yet. I needed the signature verification from Sarah in the morning. But the gun was loaded. "You stole my house," I said to the image of Logan's text message. "So I am going to take your job. I am going to take your reputation. And I am going to take every single cent you thought you were going to make off my back." I looked at the Christmas tree in the corner. The lights were blurry. I realized, for the first time that night, that I was crying. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of mourning for the sister I used to be, the one who would have let this slide, the one who would have said, "It's just money. Family matters more." That sister was dead. She died the moment the deed to Pine Hollow was signed with a forged hand. The woman who remained was something entirely different. She was a creditor, and she was coming to collect. The morning of December 23rd arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. The air was crisp and motionless, the kind of silence that usually precedes a storm. Though the forecast called for clear weather, I was awake at 6 o'clock, fully dressed in my charcoal gray wool suit, my hair pulled back into a severe, tight bun. I was not dressed for a holiday break. I was dressed for a board meeting. I drank my black coffee standing up in the kitchen, watching the live feed from the new wide-angle cameras I had installed 3 days ago. I knew they were coming. They had to. The deadline for the contract addendum had passed at midnight, and my silence had likely driven Logan into a frenzy of panic and entitlement. In the Roberts family playbook, when psychological manipulation failed, they resorted to physical imposition. They believed that if they simply occupied the space, if they moved their furniture into my rooms and their bodies into my hallway, reality would bend to accommodate them. At 8:15, the motion sensor at the bottom of the driveway triggered. First came Diane's white SUV, driving aggressively fast for a residential street. Right behind it, lumbering like a beast of burden, was a 26-foot moving truck. I watched on the screen as the caravan pulled up to my house. The truck was so large it blocked the view of the street, its air brakes hissing loudly as it came to a halt, inches from my garage door. It was a spectacle. It was a declaration of ownership. I did not panic. I placed my coffee cup in the sink. I picked up a thick manila envelope from the counter. Then, I picked up my phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the Santa Rosa Police Department. I had spoken to the dispatch supervisor yesterday, alerting them to a potential domestic trespass situation, so my file was already flagged. "This is Riley Roberts at Juniper Ridge," I said calmly. "The individuals I have a restraining order pending against are currently attempting to breach the property with a moving van. I would like an officer to assist. We have a unit 2 minutes away," the dispatcher confirmed. I hung up. I watched the screen. Logan hopped out of the passenger side of the SUV. He was wearing a camel-colored cashmere coat and aviator sunglasses. Despite the overcast sky, he looked every inch the successful entrepreneur, playing the role of the benevolent lord of the manor. He gestured grandly to the two men climbing out of the moving truck, pointing at my front door as if he were giving them permission to enter his own castle. Diane got out of the driver's side. She was checking her makeup in the side mirror before turning to bark orders at the movers. She pointed at the front steps, then made a sweeping motion with her hand, indicating they should start unloading immediately. They were not just visiting, they were moving him in. They were betting everything on the fact that I would not cause a scene in front of strangers. They were betting that my desire to save face would override my desire to save myself. I walked to the front door, I unlocked it, stepped out onto the concrete porch, and then, very deliberately, I pulled the door shut behind me. The electronic deadbolt whirred and clicked into place. I stood there, arms crossed, the envelope held tight against my chest. I was the gatekeeper. Logan was halfway up the walk, a boxes and tape gun in his hand. He stopped when he saw me. A smile, tight and practiced, plastered itself onto his face. "Riley," he called out, his voice booming with forced cheerfulness. "Good morning. Look, I know we had a little spat, but Mom and I decided to just rip the Band-Aid off. Since I'm moving in anyway, we figured we would get it done before Christmas Eve so we can all relax. I brought the movers, so you do not have to lift a finger." He took another step. "Stop," I said. My voice was not loud, but it projected clearly across the frost-covered lawn. The two movers, burly men in blue coveralls, paused by the truck's ramp. They sensed the shift in the air immediately. They dealt with domestic disputes for a living. They knew the sound of a welcome and the sound of a warning. "Oh, come on, Logan laughed, but his eyes behind the sunglasses were darting around. "Don't be dramatic. The clock is ticking on these guys' hourly rate. Just open the door." Diane marched up beside him. She was wearing a festive red scarf that looked like blood against the gray morning. "Riley, open the door right now," she hissed, her voice low so the movers wouldn't hear. "Do not embarrass us in front of the workers. We are doing this for the family." "There is no family here," I said. "There is only a homeowner and 3 trespassers." "I am your mother," Diane screeched, her volume rising. "And this is your brother. He needs a place to stay to secure the contract that pays your salary. You are going to let him in, and you are going to sign that paper, and we are going to be a normal family." "The contract is under audit," I said. "And as for the house," I didn't have to finish the sentence. From the bottom of the hill, the blue and red lights swept across the trees. A police cruiser turned into the driveway, blocking the moving truck from behind. A second cruiser pulled up onto the curb. The silence that followed was absolute. Diane's face went slack. She looked at the police cars, then back at me, her eyes wide with genuine shock. "You called the police on Christmas, on your own blood." "I called the police on intruders," I repeated. 2 officers stepped out of the cars. One was a tall woman with a stern face. The other was a younger man. They walked up the driveway with their hands resting on their belts. "Is there a problem here?" the female officer asked, looking between the group on the lawn and me standing on the porch. Logan immediately stepped forward, flashing his charming smile, though it looked brittle now. "No problem, officer. Just a little family miscommunication. My sister is just having a bit of a holiday stress moment. We are just moving some things in. I am staying here for a few months." The officer didn't smile back. She turned to me. "Ma'am, is this man a resident at this address?" "No," I said clearly. "I am the sole owner of this property. No one else resides here. These individuals do not have keys, they do not have a lease, and they do not have my permission to be on the premises. I have asked them to leave, and they are refusing." "That is a lie," Diane shouted, stepping toward the officer. "He is family. It is family property. We all pitched in for this." It was a desperate lie, born of the delusion that because they felt entitled to my money, they actually legally owned it. "Officer," I said, stepping down one stair and handing her the manila envelope, Here is a copy of the deed recorded in my name only. Here is a copy of the mortgage statement. And here is a copy of the cease and desist letter I sent via certified mail 3 days ago, revoking their license to enter. The officer took the envelope. She opened it, scanned the deed, and then looked at the cease and desist. She looked at Logan, who was starting to sweat. "Sir," the officer said, her voice dropping an octave into command tone, "do you have any proof of residency, a utility bill, a driver's license with this address?" No, not yet," Logan stammered. "I just moving in today. It is an informal arrangement. My sister said—" "I said no," I cut in. "I have the text messages to prove it." The officer handed the papers back to me. She turned to Logan. "Sir, the homeowner has established that you have no legal right to be here. This is private property. You need to remove your vehicle and your contractors immediately, or you will be cited for trespassing." "You cannot be serious," Logan said, his voice cracking. "I have a truck full of furniture. I have nowhere else to go. I gave up my lease." "That sounds like a civil issue, sir," the officer said. "Right now, it is a criminal trespass issue. Get in the truck and leave." Logan looked at me. For a second, the mask dropped completely. There was no charm, no arrogance, just pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked like a cornered animal. "You are ruining me," he whispered. "You ruined yourself," I said. "You just used my credit card to do it." Diane burst into tears. It was a theatrical, wailing sob designed to garner sympathy from the neighbors who were now peering out of their windows. "How can you be so cruel? It is Christmas. We are your family. We raised you. After everything we sacrificed for you. You sacrificed my cabin," I said. The words were quiet, meant only for them. "You sold Pine Hollow. You forged my name. Do not talk to me about sacrifice." Diane froze mid-sob. Her face went pale. She realized, in that second, that I knew. She started, but the words died in her throat. The movers, sensing the job was dead, didn't wait for instructions. The driver climbed back into the cab of the massive truck. He threw it into reverse. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was piercing. It cut through the morning air like a metronome counting down the end of their influence. In a neighborhood decked out with inflatable snowmen and twinkling lights, the harsh industrial warning of a reversing commercial truck was the soundtrack of their humiliation. The neighbors were watching. Mrs. Higgins across the street was standing on her porch with her coffee. The young couple next door was looking through their blinds. The Roberts family, who prided themselves above all else on appearing perfect, on being the envy of the community, were being evicted from a driveway by the police. "Ma'am, you too," the officer said to Diane. Diane looked at me one last time. Her eyes were red, her mascara smudged. She tried one last angle. "If you do this, Riley, there is no coming back. You are orphaning yourself. You will be alone on Christmas. You will be alone forever." I looked at the moving truck backing down the hill. I looked at the police standing guard. And I looked at the gray sky that felt like it was finally clearing. "I would rather be alone in a house I own," I said, "than crowded in a house of thieves." I reached into the envelope and pulled out the last document. I walked past the officer and thrust it into Diane's shaking hand. "This is the formal trespass notice," I said. "If you or Logan or Dad step foot on this property again, I won't just call the police to move you. I will press charges. Merry Christmas." I turned around and walked back up the steps. I scanned my thumb on the lock. The deadbolt retracted with a smooth, expensive mechanical slide. I stepped inside and closed the door. Through the glass, I watched them retreat. Logan was shouting at the truck driver. Diane was slumped in the driver's seat of her SUV. The police waited until both vehicles had cleared the driveway and disappeared down the winding road of Juniper Ridge. Only then did my knees shake. I sat down on the bottom step of the entryway. Pulling my knees to my chest, the house was quiet. The beep, beep, beep was gone. I looked at the neighbors across the street. Mrs. Higgins was still watching. I didn't hide. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and gave her a small, polite wave. She hesitated, then waved back. They saw the police. They saw the truck leave. They saw the conflict. But they also saw who was still standing inside the house. My family had lived on the currency of face, of looking the part, of acting superior. Today, in front of the entire neighborhood, that currency had been devalued to zero. They had tried to bring a siege engine to my door, and I had turned it away with a piece of paper and a backbone I didn't know I had until they tried to break it. I walked into the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the sink. I brewed a fresh pot. The siege was broken, but the war for the $1 million was just entering its final phase. The retaliatory strike did not come in the form of a brick through my window or a slashed tire. The Roberts family was far too concerned with appearances for vandalism. Instead, the attack arrived at 1:15 in the afternoon via a high-priority email notification that pinged loudly in the silence of my home office. They had realized that they could not breach the physical perimeter of my home, so they had decided to lay siege to the one thing that allowed me to pay for it, my career. The email was not addressed to me. It was addressed to Marcus, the vice president of operations at Northvale, and CC'd to the director of human resources. It was written by Sloan. My sister-in-law had spent 10 years in pharmaceutical sales. She knew exactly how to weaponize corporate language to sound like a concerned stakeholder rather than a vindictive relative. I had administrative privileges on the project server, which meant I could see the incoming correspondence flagged for the Ravenbrook file. I opened it, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer, icy shock of their calculation. Subject: formal complaint regarding vendor bias and unprofessional conduct. Ravenbrook Project. Dear Marcus, it is with a heavy heart that I must bring to your attention a disturbing lack of professionalism regarding the landscape contract management for Ravenbrook Retreat. As you know, Caldwell TerraWorks has acted in good faith throughout this process. However, it has become impossible to ignore that the project manager, Ms. Roberts, is currently navigating a severe personal mental health crisis that is clouding her professional judgment. She has expressed deep-seated personal animosity toward her family members who operate TerraWorks, and she is currently using her position at Northvale to exact personal revenge for private family disputes. We have documentation of her erratic behavior and believe she is intentionally obstructing the contract to harm a qualified vendor. We ask for an immediate review of her conduct. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. In 2 paragraphs, Sloan had reframed my due diligence as erratic behavior and my refusal to commit fraud as personal revenge. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was the legal department. Riley, the voice was clipped. We need you on a secure video link. Now, compliance and HR are already on the line. I didn't panic. I put on my blazer over my blouse. I smoothed my hair. I opened the folder on my desktop named Evidence. When I joined the call, 3 faces stared back at me. Marcus looked tired. The head of HR looked concerned. But it was the director of compliance, a sharp-eyed woman named Elena, who looked like she was ready to conduct an execution. Riley, Elena started without preamble. We received a disturbing communication alleging that you are compromising the bid process due to a personal vendetta. The vendor claims you are blocking their contract because of a family dispute. Is it true that you denied their addendum yesterday? Yes, I said calmly. And is it true that you called the police on the vendor's principal owner, Logan Roberts, this morning? I called the police on a trespasser who attempted to move furniture into my private residence without my consent, I corrected. The fact that he is the vendor is secondary to the fact that he was breaking the law. This looks messy. Riley, Marcus said, rubbing his temples. They are claiming you are unstable. They are saying you invited him to live there and then snapped. They are threatening a lawsuit for tortious interference. They are projecting, I said. I am not obstructing a qualified vendor. I am blocking a vendor who is attempting to defraud this company. I shared my screen. Exhibit A, I said, pulling up the text messages from Logan. Here is the vendor explicitly stating that if I do not sign the addendum to release funds early, I will be cut off from the family. That is extortion. He is leveraging a personal relationship to bypass financial controls. I clicked to the next slide. Exhibit B, I said. This is the video footage from my security cameras last night. You can hear Diane Roberts admitting that they need the money to save Logan because he is in debt. This is not a solvent company. They need Northvale's mobilization check to pay off previous liabilities. The room on the screen went quiet. Elena leaned closer to her camera. That is compelling, she said, but it does not explain one thing. Sloane's email attached a file. She claims that TerraWorks has possession of internal design documents that prove they were collaborating with you long before the bid process. She claims you gave them the designs to help them win, and now you are backtracking. My stomach turned over. They were using the stolen file, my graduate thesis, as proof that I had colluded with them. It was a twisted, suicidal logic admit to receiving stolen goods to prove the victim was an accomplice. They have a file called Courtyard Schematic V2. I asked. Yes, Elena said. It has your name on the original metadata. I did not give that to them, I said. They stole it. Riley, the HR director, warned. That is a serious accusation. How does a landscape contractor steal a digital file from your secure work laptop? They didn't steal it from my work laptop, I said. They stole it from my personal archive, and I can prove exactly when. I pulled up the email from Diane, the apple pie email. Look at the date, I said, highlighting the timestamp. September 14th, 3 years ago. My mother asked to borrow my old personal laptop to find a recipe. Now, look at the metadata on the file TerraWorks submitted. I overlaid the two images. The last modified timestamp on the stolen design file matched the time Diane had the laptop to the minute. They downloaded my intellectual property 3 years ago, I said, my voice steady but cold as liquid nitrogen. They sat on it, and when the Ravenbrook bid came up, Logan used it to pad his technical proposal, because he does not have the skill to design a complex water retention system himself. I did not collude with them. I was the target of corporate espionage conducted in my own parents' kitchen. Elena stared at the screen. She was silent for a long 10 seconds. Then she started typing furiously. Get it on the line, she said to someone off-screen. I want a forensic scrape of that file's history. If what she is saying is true, TerraWorks just submitted stolen IP as part of a commercial bid. That breaches the fraud clause immediately. There is more, I said. While you are looking, have the auditors check the insurance certificate in the TerraWorks file. Specifically, the workers' compensation policy number. Why? Marcus asked. Because I called the carrier listed on the PDF this morning. I lied, I hadn't called yet. But I knew Logan. I suspect if you check with the underwriter, you will find that policy lapsed 6 months ago. He photoshopped the date. Elena looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. You are auditing your own brother. I am auditing a risk, I said, and I suggest you check the subcontractor list too. The bid listed Greenleaf Electric for the lighting install. That is a Tier 1 provider. I bet my salary that if you check the revised schedule he tried to slip in, he swapped them for Dave's Electric or some unlicensed sole proprietor to pocket the difference. The meeting ended with a directive I had never heard before. Lock the file. Full external investigation. I closed the laptop. I was shaking again. I had just handed the executioner the axe to behead my brother's company. 10 minutes later, my personal cell phone rang. It was Logan. I shouldn't have answered, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know they understood it was over. You bitch! He screamed the moment the line opened. He sounded like he was crying. You actually told them. You told them about the laptop. You stole my work. Logan, I said. It was just a drawing. It was sitting there doing nothing. I needed it to win, he yelled. You have everything. You have the big job, the big house, the salary. I just needed a leg up, and you just destroyed me. You realize that you just torched my entire reputation in this town. Northvale will blacklist me. Everyone talks to Northvale. You built your company on fraud, I said. You built it on my money, on my designs, And on Mom and Dad's enabling, you were standing on a rotting floor. Logan, I didn't break it. I just stopped holding it up. You are dead to us, he spat. Do not expect to see anyone on Christmas. You are going to be alone in that glass box, and I hope you rot in there. I am already alone, I said. I have been alone in this family for 20 years. I hung up and blocked his number. The office was quiet again. The afternoon light was fading. I felt drained, hollowed out. I had won the battle, but the war was taking pieces of me with it. Then, the courier arrived. It was a delivery to my home address, but it had been rerouted from the corporate mailroom because of the personal tag. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The return address was just the Roberts family. I opened it. Inside was a Christmas card. It was a picture of the whole family from last year: Mom, Dad, Logan, Sloan, and me, standing in front of the fireplace at my parents' house. We all looked happy. I looked at my own face in the photo. I saw the tension in my jaw even then, the way I was standing slightly apart from them. Inside the card, Diane had written a note, but she hadn't written it to me. She had written it to Marcus, my boss. She had clearly intended to mail it to the office, but messed up the address field in her agitation. Or perhaps she sent one to him and one to me to let me know what she had done. Dear Marcus, Merry Christmas from the Roberts family. We wanted to reach out personally to apologize for any confusion regarding the TerraWorks contract. Please be patient with Erin. She has been under such terrible strain lately. Her divorce, which never happened, the medication changes, and the stress of the new house have made her quite unstable. We are trying to get her help. We hope you can overlook her outbursts. She doesn't mean to hurt the company. She is just unwell. Warmly, Diane. She used my middle name, Erin, the name I hadn't used since I was 12. And she lied about a divorce. She lied about medication. She was planting seeds of insanity. She was trying to tell my boss that I was the crazy woman in the attic, that my whistleblowing was just a symptom of a mental breakdown. She was willing to destroy my professional credibility, to paint me as a psychiatric liability, just to save Logan's contract. I looked at the card. The gold foil lettering of Peace on Earth glinted mockingly under the kitchen lights. This was their final play. If they couldn't bully me, and they couldn't hack me, they would pathologize me. They would make me the problem. I felt a cold rage that was entirely different from the anger I had felt before. This was clarifying. I picked up my phone and took a photo of the card. I took a photo of the envelope. I opened my laptop one last time. I drafted a new email to Elena, the compliance director. Subject: whistleblower status and additional evidence of retaliation. Elena, attached is a communication sent by the principal of the vendor to my direct supervisor, attempting to characterize my due diligence as a mental health crisis. This is a textbook example of retaliatory harassment against a whistleblower. I am hereby formally requesting whistleblower protection status under the California Labor Code and Northvale Corporate Policy. I am submitting my full timeline of events, including the theft of my personal property Pine Hollow Cabin to fund the vendor's performance bond, which I believe constitutes wire fraud and money laundering. I am not unstable. I am the only person in this transaction who is telling you the truth. I hit send. I stared at the screen as the progress bar whooshed across. I wasn't just defending a contract anymore. I was burning the bridge, the boat, and the river. I was becoming the thing they feared most, a witness who was no longer afraid of the consequences. The notification from the legal department arrived at 2:45 in the afternoon, tearing through the uneasy silence of my living room like a siren. It was not an email this time. It was a direct summon to a secure server room, a digital vault where Northvale stored its most sensitive litigation files. Elena, the director of compliance, was already waiting when I logged in. Her video feed was crisp, but her expression was unreadable, the kind of stone-faced neutrality that usually precedes a termination. Riley, she said, her voice devoid of the earlier warmth. We have found something, and before I show you, I need to remind you that you are under oath as a whistleblower. I understand, I said. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping each other so tightly my knuckles ached. We ran the optical character recognition software on the entire TerraWorks bid package, Elena explained. We were looking for altered dates or mismatched fonts. We found something much worse. We found a document on page 42 of the technical appendix titled Design Consulting Commitment. Are you familiar with this document? No, I said. The technical appendix usually just lists soil specs and irrigation flow rates. Take a look. Elena shared her screen. A PDF document appeared. It was a standard Northvale form, one we required for contractors who did not have a licensed landscape architect on their full-time payroll. It was a commitment letter stating that an external licensed professional had reviewed the plans and would oversee the critical infrastructure installation. At the bottom of the page, there was a signature. I stopped breathing. The air in my lungs turned to concrete. It was my signature. It was undeniably, unmistakably, my name, written in my handwriting, Riley A. Roberts. Did you sign this document, Riley? Elena asked. It is dated October 15th. That is 2 weeks before the bid was submitted. If you signed this, you were acting as a consultant for the vendor while employed as the project manager for the client. That is immediate termination and likely a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty. I stared at the screen. The signature was blue ink on white paper. It looked real. It looked like me, but it wasn't me. I did not sign that, I whispered. I have never seen that form in my life. It matches your personnel file signature, Elena said, though there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. Zoom in, I commanded. Zoom in on the R in Roberts. Elena obeyed. The pixelated curve of the letter filled the screen. Do you see the loop at the top of the R? I asked, pointing at my own monitor as if she could see me. And the way the Y at the end curls back underneath the whole name. Yes. I haven't signed my name like that since I was 22 years old, I said. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, making me nauseous. That is my college signature. I changed it when I got my professional license because the loop looked too juvenile. I simplified it. Check my current employment contract. Check the cease and desist I sent yesterday. The loop is gone. Elena pulled up my current contract on a side monitor. She compared them. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. You are right, she said. The stroke order is different. They traced it, I said, the horror rising in my throat like bile. They didn't just steal my design. They stole my identity. They took an old document, probably a birthday card, or a student loan application from a decade ago, and they lifted the signature. They pasted it onto this form to satisfy the qualified professional requirement. It was a violation so intimate it made my skin crawl. My parents, or my brother, had sat at a table, likely with a light box or a piece of tracing paper, and carefully forged my hand. They had used my own name to bypass the safety regulations I was sworn to uphold. They knew that without a licensed architect attached to the bid, TerraWorks would have been disqualified in round 1. So they didn't just ask for my help. They conscripted me without my consent. This is forgery, Elena said. This is felony forgery. There is more, a voice cut in. It was the IT director, who had been lurking on the call in audio-only mode. What is it? Elena asked. We tracked the file origin of the license certificate included in the appendix, the IT director said. The copy of Riley's State Landscape Architecture license. It wasn't downloaded from the State Board's public website. The digital fingerprint shows it was downloaded from the Northvale Legacy HR portal. When? I asked. 4 years ago, the IT director replied. From an IP address in Santa Rosa. Internet service provider Comcast Residential. My parents' house. I closed my eyes. 4 years ago. That was when I had briefly moved back home for a month between apartments. I had logged into the work portal to print some tax forms. I must have left the session open, or the browser saved the password. They hadn't just acted on impulse. They had been harvesting data from me for years. They kept a digital dossier of my credentials, my licenses, my old signatures, waiting for the moment they could monetize my achievements. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a dormant asset. I was a resource they mined whenever their own incompetence created a deficit. So, to clarify, Elena said, her voice typing as she spoke. The vendor utilized a stolen internal document and a forged signature to fraudulently qualify for the technical tier of the bid. Yes, I said. That explains how they passed the technical review, Elena muttered. But it does not explain how they passed the initial vendor screening. TerraWorks has a credit score of 500. Our cutoff is 650. The system should have auto-rejected them before a human even saw the proposal. Someone overrode it, I said. We are looking at that now, Elena said. The audit log shows a manual override on November 2nd, authorized by Kevin Miller, Junior Procurement Specialist. Kevin Miller. I knew him. He was a 24-year-old kid in the purchasing department. Nice guy. Drove a Honda Civic. Always complained about his student loans. Why would Kevin override it? I asked. We pulled Kevin's corporate email. Elena said, Nothing there, but we pulled the flag on his external communications. He received a PayPal transfer on November 3rd, $2,000. From who? An LLC called Roberts Holdings. Elena said. I let out a harsh, dry laugh. Roberts Holdings. That was my father's shell company, the one he used to hide money from the IRS, or at least tried to. My father bribed a junior employee, I said. He paid Kevin $2,000 to open the back door so Logan could walk in and steal $1 million. This is RICO territory, the IT director whispered. This is racketeering. I sat back in my chair. The scale of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just Logan being lazy. It was a coordinated, multi-generational criminal conspiracy. My father provided the bribe money and the shell company. My mother provided the access to my data and the emotional manipulation. Logan provided the face and the arrogance, and I provided the credibility. I was the unwitting shield they held up to deflect scrutiny. Riley, Elena said, her voice softer now, I need you to understand what happens next. We are not just canceling the contract, we are filing a police report for corporate fraud, bribery, and forgery. Kevin is being escorted out of the building by security as we speak. This is going to destroy your brother's company, and likely your father's finances. They sold my grandmother's cabin to pay for the bond, I said. They already destroyed the only thing that mattered to me. Do what you have to do. We will issue the termination letter for cause within the hour, Elena said. Thank you. Riley, you saved the company a massive liability lawsuit. The screen went black. I sat in the darkening room, the silence pressing in on me. I felt like I had been hollowed out with a spoon. There was no triumph in this victory. There was only the cold, hard realization that the people who were supposed to protect me had been feeding off me like parasites. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a voice note from Logan. I stared at the play button. I knew I shouldn't listen to it. I knew I should just forward it to Sarah, my lawyer. But a morbid curiosity took over. I needed to hear the sound of the trap snapping shut. I pressed play. Logan's voice filled the room. He sounded drunk, or manic, or both. The background noise sounded like he was in a car. The engine revving. Riley, I know what you are doing. Sloan told me you are talking to legal. You think you are so smart, don't you? You think you can just pin this all on me? A pause, a sharp intake of breath. Well, guess what? If you go to the cops, if you tell them about the signature, I am going to tell them you gave it to me. I am going to tell them you orchestrated the whole thing. I will say you gave me the design. You gave me the password. And you told me to trace the signature because you wanted a cut of the profits. I will say you are the mastermind and you are just turning on me now because we had a fight about the house. Who are they going to believe, the disturbed sister who hates her family, or the brother who was just following her instructions? I will drag you down with me. Riley, I swear to God, if I burn, you burn. Sign the addendum. Call off the dogs. Last chance. The message ended. I looked at the phone. It was the Darvo tactic: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. It was the classic narcissist's prayer. I didn't do it. And if I did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, it's your fault. He was trying to frame me for his own crime. He was willing to perjure himself. to invent a conspiracy where I was the villain, just to avoid taking responsibility for his own greed. But he had made a fatal error. He assumed I was still playing by family rules, where truth was malleable and perception was everything. He didn't realize we were now playing by the rules of forensic evidence. I had the timestamps. I had the audit logs showing I was the one who flagged the fraud. I had the recording of Diane admitting they sold the cabin behind my back. I had the timeline. His threat wasn't a weapon. It was a confession. I forwarded the voice note to Elena and to Sarah. Subject: additional threat from vendor. Attempted blackmail. Then I stood up and walked to the window. The sun had set. The lights of Santa Rosa were twinkling in the valley below. Somewhere down there, in the house I grew up in, my parents and my brother were likely gathered around a table, drinking scotch, convincing themselves that they were the victims, that I was the ungrateful monster who had ruined Christmas. They were preparing for a fight. They probably thought they could guilt-trip me, or scare me, or bully me into retracting my statement before the holiday. But they didn't know that the termination letter was already being drafted. They didn't know that the police report was being typed up. "You want a war for Christmas?" I whispered to the reflection in the glass. "You got one." I walked to the smart thermostat and turned the heat up to 72 degrees. I was done being cold. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. The timeline for the gift delivery was set. Northvale was about to drop a $1 million lump of coal into their stockings, and I was going to be the one to light the match. The evening of December 24th descended upon Juniper Ridge, not with the warmth of a holiday card, but with the cold, hard clarity of a diamond. The fog had rolled in from the coast, wrapping my glass house in a shroud of gray mist, isolating me from the twinkling lights of the neighborhood below. I sat in the living room with all the lights off, illuminated only by the soft, white glow of my solitary Christmas tree. I had a glass of wine in my hand, but I wasn't drinking it. I was just holding it, feeling the temperature of the glass against my palm, waiting. I knew they weren't done. The Roberts family did not go gently into the good night. They raged against the dying of their influence. At 7 o'clock, the motion sensors triggered. I didn't need to look at the app. I just looked up. Standing outside my floor-to-ceiling living room window, separated from me by 2 inches of double-paned, tempered glass, was my mother. She wasn't banging on the door. She wasn't ringing the bell. She was just standing there in the mist, wearing her heavy wool coat, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. She looked like a ghost haunting the house she felt she deserved, because the lights were off inside and the security floods were on outside. She could see me clearly sitting in the dark. She raised her hand and pressed her palm against the glass. My phone rang. It was her number. I stared at her through the window. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and pleading. She looked older than she had a week ago. The stress of the failed move-in, the police intervention, and the looming financial ruin had carved deep lines around her mouth. I answered the phone, but I didn't say hello. I just held it to my ear, watching her lips move in sync with the voice in the speaker. "Riley," she said. Her voice was trembling, stripped of the imperious command she usually wielded. It was the voice she used when she wanted something soft, wounded, maternal. "Please, it is Christmas Eve. Open the door. It is freezing out here." "Go home, Mom," I said. My voice was steady, muffled by the insulation of the house. "I cannot go home knowing my daughter is sitting here all alone," she said, leaning her forehead against the cold glass. "We are setting the table. Dad is carving the turkey. We have your place setting ready. We kept the chair open, just like always." It was a powerful image, the empty chair, the grieving family waiting for the prodigal daughter. It was designed to bypass my logic and strike directly at the primitive part of my brain that craved belonging. "I am not alone," I said. "I am safe. There is a difference." "Riley, listen to me," she pleaded. "We can fix this, all of it. Logan is sorry. I am sorry. We pushed too hard. We know that now. But family forgives. That is what we do. Just come home. Sign the addendum not for the money, but as a gesture of peace. Just sign it to show you still love us." If you sign it, you can come back. We will forget everything that happened this week. We will start fresh." I stood up and walked to the window. I stood inches from her, separated only by the invisible barrier of the glass. I could see the condensation forming around her mouth where her warm breath hit the cold surface. "You are bargaining," I said. "You are trying to trade a seat at a dinner table for $1 million in fraud. That is not love. Mom, that is a transaction." Her expression hardened slightly. "It is not a transaction. It is an olive branch. Do you really want to spend Christmas Eve filing lawsuits? Is that who you have become?" "I am not the one who filed anything yet," I said. "I just told the truth." "Well, you need to retract it," she said, her voice dropping the sweet veneer. "Because if you do not come with me right now, if you do not sign that paper, you are leaving us no choice." "No choice to do what?" "We filed an emergency injunction this afternoon," Diane said. The words hung in the air between us. "Our lawyer, a real one, not Logan's friend, went to a judge. We are claiming that Northvale is in breach of contract and that you, the project manager, are acting with malicious bias to cause irreparable harm to a local business. We are asking the court to force Northvale to honor the contract and freeze the termination." I stared at her. They had doubled down. Instead of retreating in shame, they had attacked. They were using the legal system to try and bully my employer into keeping them on the payroll. "You filed an injunction?" I asked, incredulity seeping into my tone. "On what grounds you submitted a forged bid?" "The court does not know that yet," Diane said, a flash of triumph in her eyes. "All the court knows is that a big corporation is trying to bankrupt a small family business on Christmas Eve because of a sister's vendetta. It looks terrible for Northvale. We will drag this out for months. Riley, we will depose you. We will subpoena your emails. We will make you look like a hysterical, vindictive woman who destroyed her brother because she was jealous of his success. Do you want that? Do you want your bosses to see your family laundry aired in public court?" I realized then that she wasn't here to apologize. She was here to deliver a threat wrapped in a guilt trip. She was offering me a choice: submit to their control and be family again, or resist and be destroyed publicly. "You are holding Christmas like a weapon," I said. "You are using the holiday as a noose. You think I will put my head in it just to feel warm for a few hours." "I am trying to save you from yourself," she cried out, slamming her hand against the glass. The sound was a dull thud. "Come home. Riley, stop this madness." "I am not wearing the noose anymore," I said. I hung up the phone. I looked at her one last time. Then, I reached out and pressed the button on the wall that lowered the automated blackout blinds. Diane screamed something I couldn't hear as the heavy gray fabric descended, slowly blocking her from my view, inch by inch. Her face disappeared, her red coat, her desperate eyes, her hand on the glass. When the blinds clicked shut, the room was silent again. I stood there, shaking. My heart was racing. They were going to sue. They were going to drag Northvale into a public mess. I might lose my job anyway, just because I was the epicenter of the blast. My phone buzzed again in my hand. I expected it to be Diane again, or my father, screaming about the disrespect of closing the blinds on my mother, but the name on the screen was Logan. I hesitated. I had blocked his number, but he must have called from a burner phone or an internet number. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, a notification popped up. New voicemail, and then a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Check your email. I sent you something. Please, pick up." I walked to the kitchen island and opened my laptop. My hands were trembling as I refreshed my inbox. There was an email from a generic Gmail address. The subject line was just "The Truth." Attached was an audio file. I clicked play. The audio was grainy, recorded on a phone in a pocket, muffled by fabric, but the voices were unmistakable. It was a recording of a conversation. "We cannot sell the cabin. Walter, Riley will find out." That was Diane's voice. "She won't find out until the probate clears in 10 years. My father's voice grumbled. "She never goes up there anyway. We need the cash now. Logan is drowning." But the deed requires her signature, Diane argued. So sign it, Walter snapped. You have her old report cards in the attic. Trace it. It is not like the county clerk checks that closely. We are her parents. We are doing what is best for the family. If Logan goes under, we all go under. Just sign the damn thing, Diane. There was a pause in the recording, then the sound of paper rustling, the sound of a pen scratching on paper. I feel sick doing this, Diane whispered. You are saving your son. Walter said, Riley can take care of herself. She always does. Logan needs us. The recording ended. I sat there, frozen. It was the smoking gun. It was the confession. My father commanding the forgery. My mother executing it. The explicit admission that they prioritized Logan's survival over my legal rights and my property. My phone rang again. The same unknown number. This time, I answered. You heard it? Logan's voice was a whisper. He sounded terrified. He sounded like a child who had broken a vase and was hiding under the bed. I heard it, I said. That was from 3 weeks ago, Logan said. I recorded it. I was in the hallway. I didn't know if I would need it, but I kept it. Why are you sending this to me now? Logan, I asked. You were threatening to destroy me yesterday. Because Mom just told me about the injunction, he said, his voice cracking. She told me they are suing Northvale. She thinks it is a masterstroke. She thinks it will force a settlement. And I know what you found, Logan said. Sloan told me the compliance officer found the fake signature on the consulting form, Riley. If Northvale fights this injunction, they are going to produce that fraud evidence in court. And if they do that, I go to prison, not just for debt, but for forgery, for corporate fraud. You are going to prison anyway, Logan. No, he pleaded. Listen to me. If I give you this proof that they made me do it, that they sold the cabin and forced me to use the money, can you keep me out of it? Can you tell them I was coerced? I closed my eyes. It was pathetic. It was despicable. He wasn't sending this because he felt guilty about what they did to me. He was sending it because he realized his parents' strategy of attack was going to result in his own destruction. He was throwing them to the wolves to save his own skin. You want to turn state's evidence against Mom and Dad, I said flatly. They are the ones who forged the deed, Logan cried. You heard the tape Dad made her do it. I just took the money because I had no choice. Riley, please, if this goes to court, I am ruined. I am asking you as my sister, help me cut a deal. I looked at the blacked-out window where my mother had just stood, begging for family unity. Here is the deal, I said, my voice cold and hard. I am not your lawyer. I cannot promise you immunity. But if you want any chance of leniency, you are going to write a sworn affidavit right now. You are going to detail exactly how the cabin was sold, who signed it, and who uploaded the stolen design files to the Northvale portal. You are going to corroborate the recording. Okay, Logan breathed. Okay, I will do it. And Logan? Yeah. You are going to send that affidavit to me, to my lawyer, and to Northvale Compliance, tonight, within the hour. Okay, I am doing it now. One more thing, I said. Why did you record them? There was a long silence on the line. Because, Logan whispered, and for the first time, he sounded honest. Because I knew Dad would blame me if it went wrong. In this family, even the golden child is just an insurance policy. Don't tell Dad, he added hurriedly. Please, Riley, whatever you do not tell him I gave you this until it is over. He will kill me. He won't have time to kill you, I said. He will be too busy finding a criminal defense attorney. I hung up. I didn't wait. I didn't agonize over the moral implications of destroying my parents. They had made their choice when they sat at that kitchen table and traced my signature to steal my inheritance. I forwarded the email with the audio file to Sarah. I forwarded it to Elena at Northvale. I forwarded it to the detective who had taken my report regarding the identity theft. Subject: additional evidence. Confession of forgery and grand theft. I sat back in the chair. It was done. With that one click, I had dismantled the lawsuit. The injunction would be dead on arrival. No judge in the world would grant relief to a plaintiff who had been recorded conspiring to commit felonies against the defendant's employee. Northvale was safe, my job was safe, and my family. They were about to experience a very different kind of Christmas morning. I looked at the clock. It was 11:50 p.m., 10 minutes to Christmas. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I opened the fridge and took out a small plate I had prepared for myself. Some expensive cheese, some crackers, a few slices of prosciutto. I poured a fresh glass of wine. I walked back to the living room and sat on the floor next to the tree. The only light came from the small white bulbs. I was alone. There was no turkey. There was no laughter. There was no pile of gifts. But there was no anxiety. There was no knot in my stomach wondering if I was fat, if I was successful enough, if I had said the wrong thing. There was no debt. There was no lie. I took a sip of wine. For 35 years, I had been taught that being alone on Christmas was the worst fate imaginable. I had been taught that the noise and the chaos and the cruelty of family were better than silence. They were wrong. The silence was heavy. Yes, but it was the heaviness of a blanket, not a stone. Merry Christmas, Riley, I whispered to myself. I took a bite of cheese. It tasted like freedom. The emergency hearing took place on December 28th, tucked between the holidays like an unwanted receipt. The courtroom in downtown Santa Rosa was sterile and cold, smelling of floor wax and stale coffee. It was not the dramatic setting one sees in movies. It was a room of fluorescent lights and wood veneer where dreams went to be dissected by the scalpel of the law. I sat on the defense side, next to Northvale's lead counsel, a man named Mr. Henderson who wore a suit that cost more than my first car. On the plaintiff's side sat my family. Diane and Walter were dressed in their Sunday best, trying to project an image of respectable, wronged business owners. Logan sat between them, looking like a man who was waiting for a trapdoor to open beneath his feet. He refused to make eye contact with me. He knew that in the briefcase next to my feet lay the affidavit he had emailed me on Christmas Eve, the document that would save his skin while flaying his parents alive. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked annoyed to be there during the court's recess week. "We are here on the matter of Caldwell TerraWorks versus Northvale Development Group," she said, flipping through the file. "Plaintiff seeks a temporary restraining order to prevent the defendant from terminating a construction contract, alleging bad faith and retaliatory conduct. Counsel, you may proceed." My family's lawyer, a man Logan had likely found on a billboard, stood up. He was blustery and loud, trying to compensate for a lack of facts with volume. "Your Honor," he began, gesturing wildly toward me. "This is a simple case of a domestic dispute spilling into the corporate sphere. The project manager, Ms. Roberts, was disinvited from a family Christmas gathering due to personal friction. In retaliation, she has abused her corporate power to fabricate reasons to void a valid, executed contract worth $1.2 million. She is trying to bankrupt her own brother out of spite. This is vindictive, it is unprofessional, and it causes irreparable harm to my client's business." Diane nodded solemnly from the bench, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. She was playing the role of the heartbroken mother to perfection. The judge looked at me. "Mr. Henderson," Northvale's lawyer stood up. He didn't wave his arms. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up a single piece of paper. "Your Honor, Northvale is not terminating this contract because of a Christmas dinner," Henderson said smoothly. "We are terminating for cause based on gross fraud, forgery, and identity theft. We are happy to present the evidence." The air in the room changed instantly. The boredom vanished, replaced by a sharp, electric tension. "Fraud?" the judge asked. "Exhibit A," Henderson said, handing a document to the bailiff. "This is a design consulting commitment form submitted by the plaintiff to qualify for the bid. It bears the signature of Ms. Riley Roberts as the supervising architect. However, Ms. Roberts did not sign this document." Diane stiffened. I saw Walter grab her arm. "Ms. Roberts," the judge said. looking directly at me. "Did you sign this?" "No, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady in the quiet room. "That is a tracing of a signature I used over a decade ago on personal family documents. It was lifted without my consent and applied to this form to bypass Northvale's safety regulations." "That is a lie," Diane blurted out. "Order," the judge snapped, slamming her gavel. Henderson continued, relentless. "Exhibit B, we have a sworn affidavit from Mr. Logan Roberts, the principal of Caldwell TerraWorks, admitting that the signature was forged by his parents, Diane and Walter Roberts, and that he was instructed to include it in the bid package." A gasp went through the room, not from the gallery, but from the plaintiff's table. Diane whipped her head around to look at Logan. The look on her face was not maternal. It was the look of a predator realizing its own cub had bitten it. Logan stared straight ahead, his face pale as a sheet, sweating through his collar. He had made his deal with me. He had chosen survival. "Your Honor," the plaintiff's lawyer stammered, clearly blindsided, "I was not aware of this affidavit." "It seems your clients were not entirely forthcoming with you," the judge said dryly. "There is more," Henderson said. "Exhibit C, the plaintiff claims irreparable harm if the contract is canceled. However, the performance bond required for this contract, the financial guarantee was purchased with funds obtained through wire fraud." He laid the deed to Pine Hollow on the table. 3 weeks ago, the parents of the plaintiff sold a property held in trust for Ms. Roberts without her knowledge or consent. They forged her signature on the grant deed, liquidated the asset for $210,000, and used $50,000 of those stolen proceeds to purchase the bond for this contract. This contract is not a business agreement, Your Honor. It is the laundering vehicle for a grand theft. The judge picked up the deed. She looked at the signature on the deed, then at the signature on the consulting form. She looked at Diane and Walter. "Mrs. Roberts," the judge said, her voice dangerously low, "did you sell this property without the beneficiary's consent?" Diane stood up. She couldn't help herself. The mask of the victim crumbled, revealing the entitled tyrant underneath. "It was family property," she shouted, her voice echoing off the wood paneling. "She is my daughter. She owes this family. We raised her. We fed her. And she sits there in her glass house hoarding money while her brother drowns. We did what we had to do to survive. It is all the same money anyway." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the confession. It was the justification. It was the entire rotten core of the Roberts family philosophy laid bare on the court record. They truly believed that my existence was a subsidiary of their own, that my assets were theirs to liquidate, and my name was theirs to forge. "Sit down, ma'am," the judge ordered. "Now," Diane sank back into her chair, realizing too late that she had just admitted to a felony in open court. Walter put his head in his hands. The judge turned to the plaintiff's lawyer. "Counsel, your request for an injunction is denied with prejudice. Frankly, you are lucky I am not holding your clients in contempt right now. This court finds that Northvale has more than sufficient cause to terminate the contract immediately." She turned to me. Her eyes softened. Just a fraction. "Ms. Roberts, regarding the sale of the cabin and the forgery, this court strongly suggests you file a separate civil action and a criminal complaint with the district attorney. The evidence presented here is substantial." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. "My counsel is filing the paperwork this afternoon." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot ending a long, miserable war. "Case dismissed." I stood up. I didn't look at my parents. I walked toward the exit with Henderson. But as I reached the aisle, Logan stood up. He looked at me with pleading eyes, waiting for a nod, a thank you, some acknowledgement that he had helped me win. I looked right through him. He had provided the evidence, yes, but only because he was afraid of prison, not because he was sorry. He was still the man who tried to blackmail me. He was still the man who spent my inheritance on gambling debts. I walked past him without breaking stride. Outside the courtroom, the hallway was flooded with the cold winter light. Henderson shook my hand. We will send the formal termination letter within the hour, he said. The legal team is also forwarding the fraud packet to the district attorney's office as we are required to do by corporate policy. It is out of your hands now. Riley, the state will take it from here. Good, I said. I walked out of the courthouse and down the steps. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my security system. Motion detected at front door. I opened the app. It was a delivery driver dropping off a package. A normal, mundane event. No trucks, no intruders, no family. I drove straight to the sheriff's station. I met Sarah, my personal lawyer, in the lobby. We filed the application for a permanent restraining order against Diane and Walter Roberts. We attached the court transcript from an hour ago where Diane admitted to the forgery. It was a slam dunk. Then, we filed the civil suit for the recovery of the value of Pine Hollow, plus punitive damages for fraud and emotional distress. I knew the money was likely gone. I knew I might never see the full $200,000 again, but the judgment would hang over them for the rest of their lives. It would garnish their wages, place liens on their home, and ensure that they could never financially abuse anyone ever again. I wasn't doing it for the money. I was doing it for the seal. I was putting a legal seal on the door of my life that said, "Closed to the Roberts family." That night, New Year's Eve, the fog cleared. I stood in the center of my living room in the glass house on Juniper Ridge. The Christmas tree was still up, its white lights reflecting infinitely in the dark windows. The fire was crackling in the gas fireplace. Buster, my dog, was snoring softly on the rug. I held a glass of champagne. It was expensive vintage, a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. I thought about where my family was right now. They were likely sitting in their living room, amid the wreckage of their own making. Logan was probably blaming them. They were probably blaming me. They were facing criminal investigations, bankruptcy, and public humiliation. The $1 million contract, the gift they thought they were entitled to, had evaporated into smoke. They had tried to cancel my Christmas to teach me a lesson about power. They wanted me to learn that I was nothing without them. Instead, I had taught them a lesson about law. I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of the city. I felt a profound, deep stillness. It wasn't happiness. Exactly. It was something heavier and more durable. It was ownership. For the first time in 35 years, I owned my name. I owned my signature. I owned my home. And most importantly, I owned my peace. To the new year, I whispered to the empty room, raising my glass to the reflection of the woman standing tall in the glass. They canceled my invitation, so I canceled their ownership of my life. I took a sip. It was crisp, cold, and perfect. Thank you so much for listening to this story of boundaries, betrayal, and the ultimate legal clapback. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, while cooking dinner, or maybe relaxing at home like Riley? Please leave a comment below and let me know. And don't forget to subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just enforcing the law.